people are at the end of all of this work. And it's important that we don't forget that. And I kind of let myself go into a system that did forget that.
Yeah.
Quite frankly. And so that for me was kind of one of the moments that I anchor in to say, yeah, that is why this is so important. And that's why acknowledging the human experience is so important through this work.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Book Leads Impactful Books for Life and Leadership. I'm your series host and leadership performance coach, John Jaramillo. This podcast series is about getting to the books that have impacted the lives of the people in my network. So these are great leads that I'll be having these conversations with to get to that book that has really impacted their life, their work, their leadership, all of it, all those worlds intersect, whether they're the author of the book or not. And my guest today is Travis D. Hahler, and Travis transforms how Fortune 500 companies navigate change by revealing a startling truth. Resistance isn't rebellion. As Senior Director of Global Strategy and Transformation at Salesforce and founder of the Neurological Nomad, Travis brings an unprecedented fusion of neuroscience and business acumen to organizational transformation. His unique journey conducting EEG research in Denmark, studying neuropsychology at Harvard, earning an MBA, and leading change at Google, Salesforce, and others makes him a unique transformation expert who can explain why your amygdala sabotages your strategic plan and why you can blame everything on your basil ganglia. Hopefully I pronounced that right, Travis. Just let me know. Over 15 years, Travis has guided more than 100 companies through successful transformations, earning him the nickname Resistance Fortune Teller for his uncanny ability to predict where change efforts will fail. His signature keynote, The Neuroscience of Change, has reached over 25,000 leaders across 150 global events, consistently delivering that aha moment when executives finally understand why 70% of transformations fail to achieve their goals, and more importantly, how they can join the successful 30%. Travis lives with his husband, Brian, son, Lachlan, and dog, Burton, while working toward a future where understanding neural wiring leads to putting people back at the center of change. This seems like it's amazing how many conversations, Travis, and thank you for being here, my friend. It's amazing how many conversations based on the work that somebody's doing, they are timely. But with everything going on in the world, neuroscience and performance and leadership just stands out so much more just because of the emotion of it all. How you see people interact with each other. Obviously not all bad, but I mean, we just have to be realistic about the society and the times that we're living in where it's kind of like everybody is on edge. And you just see these, I could just imagine like what the synapses look like firing on all cylinders in one particular direction, whatever direction that person feels most comfortable in or fearful of. And that's kind of what dictates how we interact and learn from and talk to and live and exist with each other. So this is a great conversation. I'm grateful you're here, genuinely, because I'm really curious about the work that you're doing and how you kind of intersect all those fields and worlds that I broke down in your bio. So again, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk. As you mentioned, there's a lot to probably unpack with where we are today.
Yeah. So Travis, obviously great bio. So who are you today? What does your work look like across all these different points of the work that you're doing? What is I usually say typical week, and I've had people say, well, I don't have a typical week, but what is, I don't know, your average week? Like usually what does your week look like? Whether it's writing or coaching or whatever it may be that you're into, what does that look like so we get a sense of who the person is that's going to share their book with us?
Absolutely. So I live in many different worlds, and I think that's not uncommon anymore these days. But really, I sit at this intersection of strategy and transformation and human behavior, and then my own personal life. But if you go to kind of my day job, as shall we say, Senior Director of Global Strategy and Transformation at Salesforce, I lead large enterprise-wide initiatives that can affect tens of thousands of people. And it's such a privilege to work alongside our leaders to try to create better change within our own organization. So I spend a lot of time helping those leaders really take ambitious strategies and the way that the world is today with AI and everything, it's only more and more ambitious every day, and try to turn those things into something that people can understand and adopt and sustain. So my week, to your earlier point, the consulting answer is it depends on what's happening. But I spend a lot of time checking in on programs, managing my own team, meeting with leaders, talking about potential shifts, changes, and really thinking ahead for what the moments are that are going to come up, in the coming weeks or months, and trying to build that into a strategy that we can leverage to reach people. And so that's my day job. Outside of my day job, I have my other job, which is running the Neurological Nomad. And that's where I speak, I write, I work with leaders outside of Salesforce and talk about neuroscience and their leadership and how they can really dig into that and create better teams, better leaders, and really think about people. And it's really pretty simple. It's really about empathy at the heart of it. And then I have my personal life, and I'm a husband, I'm a dad, and honestly, that's the most important part of the whole thing. But one of the things that I never expected about that part of my life was that I kind of thought they would all exist in separate bubbles, and the way that they all integrate together is really profound. And being a dad, I lean on so much of what I know about neuroscience. I have a toddler, by the way, 3.5. So everything that he's doing,
very interesting age.
I have this internal battle of, I understand neurologically, like where he's at in development, but also like I'm still a dad, and I'm like, can we just pick a pair of shoes? Like, please, for the love of God.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, you bring up your child, and I talk about how I've talked about in previous episodes. It comes up where you kind of mix your work with your home life, and you're so much of both that they're bound to kind of mix into each other. But there are moments where it's kind of like you said, can we pick this? Can you just focus, concentrate for a second? It's even happened with my wife where she's like, I listened to you talk about all this communication stuff and you're not communicating with me. So there's those things that come through and those things that stay apart. But, how do you see, before we jump into the other questions, how do you see that benefit your raising your child, maybe as opposed to somebody of your parents' generation raising you? Like, where do you think the benefit is there? Because it's so different from, not saying that we're the same age, but our parents' generation raising us versus us raising our kids. Can you speak to that? How does your work kind of factor into your relationship with your kids?
It's a great question. I think growing up, there was a lot of time spent, kind of not on my own in that sense, but like very independently. And my parents were busy. They had lives and jobs and things like that too. And I feel like as I've kind of grown and started my family, one of the things about my background that I think has been really important to me is understanding and naming emotion, experience, desire, and want, and separating some of those things and helping him separate them. Because the reality of being a parent, if you think about the biology of it, is your job is really to help regulate them. And that's a burden. One, that's a lot to put on another human being. But two, I don't know that was known before this generation, that's such an important part of raising a child, is that as an adult, because you have the fully formed brain, your job is to regulate them and help them regulate themselves and learn how to do it. And it is not an easy skill, and it's not something easy to teach either. It takes a ton of patience. It takes a ton of time. It takes a ton of commitment.
Yeah.
But I think that's one of the things that has been very important to me as I've been raising my son, and important to us as a couple, is that kind of emotional regulation, helping them name what it is that they're feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, when we were growing up, like you said, there weren't the words to it, there weren't the conversations to it. There were just the quick judgments of good kid, bad kid. But now it is really thinking about, okay, this is when they're developing these different phases, these different emotions. You're giving them the words to kind of identify what they're going through. So I appreciate you sharing. Travis, to understand how you ended up here doing this work, can you kind of break down what your path looked like to today? I usually like to start around maybe high school and going into college or going into the workforce. If you'd like to start earlier than that, that's fine. Just, I want to get a sense for the major pivot points in your life that kind of, shaped who you are today and the work that you're getting into and carrying out with your company and your clients.
Absolutely. You don't want to start on the day I was born.
Go for it. Go for it. I'm sure. Listen, I've learned that there are things that can happen so early in your life that shape who you are. So, I mean, obviously not the day that you're born, but it's incredible. I think I had somebody on here mention something that happened when they were 4 that shaped who they are. So you never know, but please go ahead.
No. I will spare you at least, a good couple decades there. But for me, if I were to kind of sum up my early development, and one of the things that, as I look back at kind of my growing up, I grew up in a small town with a family business. And one of the things that I was kind of naturally good at was being with people. I got a job at a grocery store. The mayor of my town owned it. And I was stocking shelves, and I really wanted to be a cashier. And the only reason I wanted to be a cashier was because I really liked people, and I liked talking to people, and I was a good conversationalist. As a 13-year-old, 14-year-old kid, that's pretty impressive when they can interact with 80-year-olds and 60-year-olds and 30-year-olds. And that's something that I naturally had a gift for. And so it kind of led me to this world of, I do want to help people. I want to be involved with people in some way, shape, or form. I didn't know what that was going to look like. But when I went to school, outside of high school, graduating, going to college, I started in psychology. I really thought about, okay, I think I want to help people through this idea of listening and understanding them and helping them understand themselves. And so I wanted to become a psychiatrist. And so psychology was a natural first, part of that journey. And then really I started down that path. I loved the psychology part of it, the human behavior part of it. Some very, very kind human along that way told me that to be a psychiatrist, you have to go to med school, and that killed that entire plan for me. But it was nice to learn that as a freshman rather than, as a senior.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, you're
I'd
not
say
done
very
yet.
kind person, but it saved me a lot of time. But that eventually led to, I studied abroad in Denmark. I had the opportunity to actually work in a cognitive research lab, doing EEG research, which is the thing where you put the helmet on, and then they've got all of the electrodes hooked up to it, and you're actually reading brain activity through that, or the electro pulses.
So when you didn't go down the psychiatry route, which way did you go that helped you end up in Denmark?
I just went down I'm going to just continue with psychology and see what happens route. That was my thought process. And really the Denmark was two parts actually. One was we'd had a foreign exchange student that came to my school from Denmark, and I actually went to live with her family to do this. And then 2, it was a chance to get into a lab. And so it was one of those things where, as a psychology major, the 2 paths that kind of lay out before you are, you either become a psychologist and you work with people similar to a psychiatrist, or you become a researcher and you start to understand and research human behavior and what's going on there. And so I was like, this is a good chance to see if I even want to become a researcher, because I loved writing papers. I had no problem writing the research papers. And so that was kind of where I was like, this is a good opportunity to, one, go hang out with my friend Lisa from Denmark. Shout out to the Sorensens in Denmark. But it was a great opportunity to see her. And then it was a wonderful opportunity to get into a lab and do something that was actually kind of in the line of, this could be a career choice if I like it. But what was interesting about that experience was I found neuroscience as a practice and as a science to really look into, and through that process. And I realized that I really loved the brain side of it, not necessarily the psychological research side. I really loved the brain and what it was showing and what it could tell us. And there's a million things we could get into about that particular research project. But what I left there knowing was, the brain is extremely fascinating to me. I don't know what's going to happen with it, but I also know I definitely don't want to be a lab researcher. And so I came back home and was like, okay, check that off the list. That's not what I'm going to do. And for me, coming back, knowing that I didn't want to be a researcher, I liked the idea of being a psychologist, but the realities for me was I had actually finished my degree early. And I was like, God, I'm not ready to be done after 3 years. I don't know what that means. I don't know what a job's going to look like. Also, this was a time when the job market frankly sucked. So I was like, okay, it's either try to go down this road or pivot. And and as a 20-year-old, you're kind of like, well, there's just boxes of people that exist in the world, right? Like, it's very black and white when you look at it. It's like, you're either a psychologist or you're not a psychologist. And then you go and do something completely different. So I went and got an MBA, and I said, I'm going to work in business. And that'll be the career. That's where people were hiring, was in, business roles.
Was that the majority of the thinking, kind of like where you could get the job, as opposed to going?
A good portion of it.
Okay.
A good portion of it. I also, growing up with a family business, I understood business at a very grassroots level. And for me, I was like, you know what? I know what being someone in a business career looks like, and what it might also get me in terms of what my life might look like too.
Did you go into it? Did you go into it also factoring the psychology work that you've done, that you could somehow factor that in? No, not at all.
Not at all. Not at all. I thought I was basically moving on from it.
Really?
At that point. Yeah. I kind of thought, you know what?
Wow.
I loved it, but maybe it was a passion. Maybe it was something I really liked, but wasn't a career.
Because at that point, was there really talk about neuroscience and business? Was there any connection at all? Okay. Yeah.
That came back. That didn't really come around until 5 to 7 years later, really. And that was very, very early in that process. Now we talk about it all the time, or, frequently. But yeah, so I got a corporate job. I started working in corporate America, and my first job was at Target Corporation. And I was actually working in stores, and I was helping to roll back a lot of the home-built systems that they had built in the early 2000s. And they were starting to move to more cloud-based, pretty out-of-the-box software, because what they were finding is many did. By building something homegrown, it required a lot of maintenance. And they were like, this is too much for us. It takes a fleet of people to, manage the system every time someone else changes. And with the speed at which we were advancing, it was a constant battle. So they were rolling back homegrown systems, and they were rolling out new systems that were, kind of the standards. And I found in that process, I was like, oh, I really kind of enjoy this. And I had a drink with a friend one day, and they're like, well, that's what I do in consulting all the time. I help companies, implement new things and change and look at their strategies. And I was like, that's what I want to do. And so that's what I did. I got a job with that organization, helping to do what at the time was business process improvement and Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, internal audits. And And that kind of started my time working with clients and working with customers and things like that. So what happened is kind of what you were alluding to, was that the psychology came back. And as I started to get further into my career as a consultant, I started to see a really big differentiation between the way that I approach things and the way others approach things. And in the world of change, there's an option to kind of approach it as a checklist. Like, did we do the following things? Yes or no? Or you can lean into the more human side of it, which is, what does this mean? How are they feeling about it? What's the sentiment? What are people saying? That's the route that I was going down, because that's where my psychology, human behavior background was leading me. And that was far more successful than the folks that were just doing the checklist version. And so that kind of brought the psychology back, and I started to ask questions about, why am I able to make this make sense for an executive when they've already worked with someone who's done this for a lot longer than me, or who's far more, in my opinion, far more talented in this industry than I thought I was. But I was the one that was making the connections click for executives. And I started to lean into this idea of, it's because I'm talking to them about the reality of how people experience things. And they could relate to it. And they could be like, oh, I understand why John might struggle with this based on what you're saying. And that made the difference. And that's kind of what brought this idea back to me. And they kind of converged. And then I was at a conference and around change, and I met an amazing individual who was talking about neuroscience. And I was like, oh, neuroscience? I was like, I love neuroscience. It's always been a passion. And she was actually the person that incredibly said, you know what, you should go and study it. I think you would love it. One, I think what you're doing naturally fits into a neuroscience lens. And she was like, I know a great program. And that's what led me back to neuroscience and neuropsychology at Harvard. And then I would like to say the rest is history, but it brought all of the puzzle pieces together and things that I never thought fit. And it's completely changed the way I think about my work.
It's amazing when you collect all these pieces that kind of look disparate at one point, and then you get that final piece and everything just falls into place.
It is an incredible moment. And then when you also get to look back and see how impactful individuals can be in that path too. Like, had I never had a drink with that friend who was in consulting, who said, that's what I do. Did you know that that's what consultants do? And I was like, no, I don't. I don't even know what consultants do. And had not explained that to me, I wouldn't have probably gone into consulting. Had I not met this random person at a conference that I just happened to kind of feel a connection with and have a conversation about neuroscience with, I would have probably not gone and studied neuroscience again at a program like that. So the impact that individuals in your life have, and I know that we all feel like, oh, everyone's so busy and, I'm just their friend or whatever, but it is true. We all have the opportunity to make incredible impacts on lives that we might not even realize we're making. Quite frankly, I don't know if those people even realize that they've made huge impacts on my life. I try to tell them, but in typical friend ways, they're like, you would have figured it out yourself anyway.
Yeah. It's like you got to grab them by the shoulders and be like, no, you don't understand. Like, it's life-changing. Yeah, that is incredible. And, it's like you have to be open to it. You have to be curious. Some people may just get complacent in whatever career they are, that things are good enough. But yeah, there's a power to remaining curious, because you never know whose path you're going to cross. I like that, going 1 degree further than the people I know in my immediate circle. You just never know. Like the person you spoke to at the conference, and letting them know what you're up to, letting them know what you're about. Not just the business card aspect, but who you are as a person. I think when you get to that level of your energy, something different comes out, something much different than a business card, much different than a title, that really makes a lasting impression.
It does. It really does. It's important to just be open to the experience.
Yeah. Travis, for you, what was your family business when you were growing up? You had mentioned a family business. What was that? I know you said you worked at a grocery store, but what was your family's business?
Yeah, well, I had the fortune of having two entrepreneurial parents. My mother owned a salon, which was based in our home when I was growing up, and then my dad was a car dealer, and they made a really tough and incredible choice when I was quite young to purchase a dealer franchise, and so my mom actually gave up her salon business and went into business with my dad. And they opened that franchise when I believe I was a first grader or maybe second, yeah, first grade. So it was incredible to watch, and looking back, the things that they did to build that and the lessons that it taught me, really incredible.
Can you speak to some of those?
Yeah. Oh gosh. The, I remember
First of
being
all,
a
out of
kid.
curiosity, sorry. First of all, out of
Yeah.
curiosity, the curiosity you had when you were working at the grocery store and you wanted to work at the cash register to talk to people, was that impacted by your parents at all, by that dealer experience, that customer facing interaction, maybe seeing that as a kid? Because I meant to ask you where you think you got that curiosity of people from.
That's a great question. That's the nature versus nurture question, right? I think I was always kind of a naturally charismatic kid. I could kind of talk to anyone. I wasn't really afraid of people. And my mom would say that as a young kid, I knew how to turn the charm on. I was a kid that would walk out of the store with some little old lady bought me a toy instead of my mom buying me a toy.
Yeah.
But I think part of it was, and so the nature versus nurture, I think naturally had an affinity towards it, but also the nurture side of it was, my parents instilled in me and my brother that that people are just people, and they all deserve respect. They all deserve your time. They all deserve, these opportunities to connect and to understand one another. And that transcended from just oh, you make friends in school. And I think my parents took it to another level with their business, which was that they introduced my brother and I to their customers, and people that were, as a 10-year-old, these were 40, 50-year-old people. And I think a lot of young kids shy away from older adults. And instead, my parents were kind of putting us in front of those older adults. And so there was a lot of years of life that I feel like I probably related more to the 50 plus community as a teenager than almost anyone I knew. And it was just because I understood how to talk to them, and it wasn't scary or weird. And so my parents, I think, probably instilled that in me through their business. But that's probably where some of it comes from.
What are maybe a few other lessons you learned from your parents?
A lot about customer service, a lot about what it means to sell a product. It's not just simply the sale. It's the after. It's the standing by them. It's it's the little things, the surprise and delight moments of what it means to run a business. And then it's also how to be a good leader. I got to watch, well, both my parents, but my dad in particular. I spent a lot of time talking to him through the years about how to be a good boss, how to be a good manager, that feedback is kind, that, providing people with attainable goals and things that they can actually do is important. And, setting a strategy that people can understand is also equally important. When it's a small business, again, I don't know exactly how many employees, but probably, 20 to 30 employees. It's very personal.
Yeah.
And so I got to kind of see that firsthand. There is no middle management. It's all you manage everyone, So lots of lessons in that and things that I still hold, very closely today.
Can you tell me a little bit about the Neurological Nomad?
Yeah.
Just curious how that factored into your, side by side with your career launching that.
So I launched the Neurological Nomad after I started with Google. Um, Part of it was because I was doing research and I wanted to be able to put that research and kind of unique thought somewhere. And so I wanted it to be part of a body of work. Um, and I decided that, okay, well, maybe I'll start speaking on this. Maybe I'll start talking to people about this. And so I was like, I need to have something to anchor that in. And so I started an Instagram page. And honestly, it was on the recommendation of a friend who was like, you know what, you do all this traveling, like you're always kind of all over the place, like you're doing cool stuff. You should really have an Instagram page. People would love to follow you, I think. And and again, I think I mentioned to you earlier before we talked that, you know, social media is something that is not a natural, natural skill of mine. But so I started this Instagram page called the Neurological Nomad. And with my traveling, and I was sharing things about, like, you know, I was having wine one night and I'd share just like a little tidbit about, like, did you know that wine is actually great for your brain? Like, it actually helps your brain. And then traveling, like what I'd pack in my suitcase. And then it turned into a full-fledged company through the work that I was doing, the speaking that I was doing. And it was never intended to be, but it kind of naturally just evolved from being some kind of persona to becoming me on a stage, which was really interesting.
That's incredible. So how has it evolved? It was the Instagram page, then like any kind of writing or anything like that? What other pieces or components were there to it?
Yeah, it started in all speaking. So it started to become kind of a speaking persona. And I started with one speaking engagement at a small conference in Toronto. And that was kind of the start of that speaking. And then it snowballed from there with being on stages over the years. And then it evolved into about 4 or 5 years ago, evolved into writing. And that's when I started to write. And I started to do like true research and started to put that on paper. And that eventually became the book, which is kind of an interesting progression. But yeah, it started out as just a persona, which led to speaking, which led to people wanting me to come and engage with their leadership groups. And then I started writing about that. And it wasn't even me writing to write. It was really just like capturing the experiences of, I worked with this company and it was really interesting because they had this problem they were trying to solve and we did it a creative way. It was a way for me to almost document, like, if I ever have another client that's running into this again, this would be a great thing to maybe bring up. And somehow that all became, you know, stories in this book that I ended up writing, which was never the intention of writing it down.
It's always amazing when it happens that way. We'll get to the book in a minute. Before that, just a few more questions. Does it make sense from your childhood that this is what you're doing? What is it from your childhood that comes through in the work that you're doing today, Travis?
You know, that's a great question. It's a deep question, actually. So it kind of stopped me in my tracks a little bit.
No, that's all right. That's all right. And I know obviously you shared about your parents and what you learned from them, but even when I think I already have a response to that, I always like to point that question out just because I want them to have my guests that have that direct question, because I'm always curious for myself what it is, obviously, that makes who's sitting in front of me who they are. So I want to hear from them. What is it from your childhood that comes through where you are today and what you share with people?
Yeah, I think, well, one, I don't know that anyone would have put their finger on this in particular as what I would end up doing. My parents have always said, we never worried about you. You always figured out what it was you wanted and how to get it. And so they're like, we always knew you would figure it out, and whatever it was, we were excited to see what it was going to be, which is an incredible compliment. But for me, I think the part of my childhood that comes through is like my love for people. I really do love people, you know, and the struggles that people have. And I think like my desire to help shows up in this work, because I truly see how change is so hard for people, and especially in their work, and how important it is for them to be seen in those moments and feel seen. And I used to speak at several like mental health style conferences, and a lot of people be like, mental health and change management, like, make it make sense. I'm like, there's nothing that makes more sense, because truly the way that we push things on people has a direct impact on how people exist in their mental health, in their families, in their lives outside of this place that we call our work. And so I think it all kind of came together. I didn't ever become a psychiatrist, but I do feel like I entered the same realm without the ability to prescribe medication, which maybe sometimes that would be a helpful thing. But for now, it's as close as we can get.
Is there a particular point, experience, story, whatever it might be, where you realize the power of what somebody takes away from their work, in terms of kind of like what you just referenced a minute ago of how impactful their environment, their leader, how that impacts somebody and maybe their mental health as they leave work? Was there a certain point where that kind of clicked for you or stood out for you, that impact, that ripple effect of the workplace and the impact it has on somebody?
Yeah, I wish I could say that it happened during the moment, but this is one that I actually think about probably more than I care to admit. But I was helping to implement a new system at a very large consumer products company, and I had the fortune of working with them several times. And I was kind of early in my career of consulting, and excited to go through and help solve all these problems. And I felt a bit like a detective, because we were trying to find all these things that we could optimize, and ways that we could move things over to this new system and what it meant. And we were doing all these impact assessments and all this stuff. It was very exciting work. It was very cool. And I met this box on a spreadsheet, shall we say, which ended up being a person, that was like, how does this number end up in this system? No one could figure it out. Everyone was like, somewhere along the line, this number exists in this system, and no one quite knows how it ports from one system to another, or where it comes from, or who does it. And so it was like, we went on this like detective mission of like, okay, let's track it down. Let's like take the process backwards and map it from there and figure out where it comes from. And we met this little old lady, and I say little old lady, she wasn't old, but like she was cute, and she was like stood 5 foot nothing. And she'd been there for decades. And we finally got to her, and she was like, and she pulls up this spreadsheet. And when I say spreadsheet, I mean like this thing had macros and like 80 tabs, and like it was gnarly. And we're looking at this, and she's like, so every month I take this thing from this system, I put it in this box, and then I go to this tab and it spits me out this number, which I then put into that system. And I was like, wait, so you as a person are the thing that's basically creating all the financial, like what you put, your number that you put in here feeds all the financial forecasting for this multi-billion-dollar company. And in that moment, I wish I would have said, wow, what a human moment of like, how important it is of this role that you play. But in my head, and being young, all I saw was, this is easily automatable in this new system. We can absolutely have this be something that just happens.
Yeah.
And what I didn't realize in that moment, and I realize now, and I wish I would have taken the time then to acknowledge it, was that was not just a point of pride for that individual, but it was a major point of their job. It was a major point of their who they were and their identity. It was a major point of their day to day. And I think so after the fact, and after we went through all this, and frankly, it ended up there was a lot of laying off that happened after all of this, and there was some mergers and some divestitures over the years. And, I don't even know this woman's name. But in my head, as I look back on that, I'm like, I kind of bet she might have lost her job through this whole process, or at least she lost a big portion of it, of what we automated. And that was a click moment for me, kind of retrospectively saying, people are at the end of all of this work. And it's important that we don't forget that. And I kind of let myself go into a system that did forget that.
Yeah.
Quite frankly. And so that for me was kind of one of the moments that I anchor in to say, yeah, that is why this is so important. And that's why acknowledging the human experience is so important through this work.
But I love that you put it that way, that you kind of anchored to that moment. Obviously, it's a story that's very vivid to you. So at the very least now, so many years later, you remember her work, what she did, her pride that she put into it. So at least it's an anchor now. So I think that's incredible. Travis, what do you consider your superpower? I've heard so many powers, skills, everything, but putting that question right to you, what do you consider your superpower?
I think I'm a deeply empathetic person. And what that does for me, I'm also a little neurospicy. So I think like I have a lot of things going on in that superpower. But for me,
neurospicy.
neurodivergent is what is the mainstream, but those of us who are like to say neurospicy. But for me, what that allows me to do is I get to basically take the form of other people. So, if you were to put it in like superpower terms, like I could be like, I want to be John today. I want to see what John's life looks like, what it'll look like today and what it'll look like tomorrow. What am I feeling through that process? What does it mean for me? What would he need? What would he think? How would he react most likely? And so I think that has allowed me to not just make better plans and strategies for how we make change happen, but it has allowed me to articulate that to leaders and help them understand that there are people at the end of all of this. And I think that's been an incredible superpower that I have brought to my clients as well as the companies I've worked for. And it's one I'm really proud of. I love being able to put myself in other people's shoes.
I think that one is amazing, but something that always comes up with clients that speak to that kind of power or that level or area of empathy, and guests that have been on here before, is when you feel that that's a superpower, how is it you protect yourself from taking on too much, from seeing too much, from feeling too much? So I don't know if it's like you're at the end of your day or start of your day, your self-care, or if it's something you do in the moment, but do you have a kind of approach that you take to kind of protect your sanity, your own mental health, your energy? Because I mean, that type of empathy is incredible. It's great to have, but then how do you protect yourself so you're not taking on too much?
It's the gift and the curse, right? Of the superpower, right? And they all have one. For me, I feel like the ability to take action on it is what helps me kind of put myself in and also take myself out. So I put myself in, to your point, highly empathetic, takes a lot of feeling, a lot of, in that moment, a lot of my energy to understand that person. But creating the strategy and the plan that takes that into account kind of closes that loop for me. To be like, I now took John into account and he is represented in this plan, at least in the way that we understand him. And so I get to kind of close the loop a little bit. And so it doesn't necessarily continue to nag or drain on me as I move throughout my day or week or month, whatever that looks like.
Yeah. Travis, before we jump into your book, how do you define leadership? What does great leadership look like to you?
It's really about creating conditions that people can move through difficult things as a leader for your people. So setting direction, it's holding people accountable, but it also means understanding what difficulty means from their side, so that you're creating a world that you're standing next to them and you're helping them through the tough moments that will be tough too. And there's part of that leadership that is also standing next to them while they learn. And I think that's one that we forget a lot as leaders. We understand the holding them accountable. We understand the setting the strategy and the direction. There's not a lot of time in this world anymore where we make the space to develop and help people learn. And that is something that I think is so incredible. And the leaders that I have had that I would say are by and large superstars in leadership, they're the ones that can see a person and say, John, here's the thing that I think you like is going to absolutely make you an incredible person in this work. And I'm going to stand next to you and help you learn it. I'm going to put you in situations that'll be tough, but I'm going to be right there to help you through those tough situations. I'm going to, challenge you to think differently and learn things, but I'm also going to be there when you fall or when you don't quite do it. That I think is an incredible leadership skill. And that is a true leader, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's one you don't see too often. I think a lot of people come in, they're like, I'm going to get the job done that this team needs to carry out, then move on to the next thing. But they don't really acknowledge or see the person and say, okay, this is what you're bringing to the table. This is kind of what I think you need. But when you see somebody like that, it's like a maestro. And I've always compared like great leaders to a conductor. You're looking at all the instruments, all the pieces, who needs to do just that visual of like them calling up the, I'm not into all that kind of music, but just like the energy of it. The way they face certain people when it's kind of their moment, because this is when they need to come through, the way that they face the musicians and the stakeholders are behind them. So it's like, I got to focus on them, make sure that people are delivering for you. So I can't have my back to them. So when you see a leader in action like that, kind of like that they can look at you as if you're the only person in the world, even for a 5-minute, 10-minute conversation, it's like the best gift, because being seen is just, I can't even put to words what that feels like. Really being seen, really being acknowledged and understood, or at least questioned, what is it you're looking for? What is it you need, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is really incredible to watch. And I think part of what, not to take us off on a tangent, but part of the problem is that we've moved away from this world where being at a company for 10 years is something to be proud of. And we've moved into a world where companies don't reward it either. So it is a, 2 to 5 year stint. You move on to the next thing. And in that same mode, we hire that way too. So we say, you know what? I need X skill set. I'm going to go hire it. Once that skill set's no longer needed, we restructure, we reorganize, and we either keep it and move it somewhere else, or we quite frankly let it go. And we hire something different for what we need in that moment. Instead of saying, you know what, John is like 80% of what we absolutely need for this next thing. Here's the 20% that we could develop him to build to become exactly what we need. We don't do that. We say, nope, John isn't meeting expectations. And so we will say, thank you for your service. And then we'll go hire someone who has that skill that we need now.
Yeah. Travis, at this point, let's jump into your book. Why don't you introduce the book and how it came to be, how you launched in it, how long maybe you were thinking about it, but why don't you introduce the book and, how it came to be?
Absolutely. So, the book is Rethink Resistance. It's embracing neuroscience to lead transformational change. And it's really all about leaders and how they can lead change differently for their teams. And when I say leader, what I think sometimes gets misconstrued, now obviously I come from a corporate background, and so corporate leadership is something that I speak to a lot in the book, but it's also about leading generally. So I feel like everyone is a leader in some way, shape, or form. Everyone is asking someone else to change in some way, shape, or form, whether that is in your work, it's in your community, it's in your faith, it's in your family, whatever that is. Sometimes it's even within yourself. So leadership transcends just a job title that someone might hold at a company. And so the book is really about how to lead change differently and thinking about resistance differently. So this book came from the neuroscience that I was studying, and truly understanding that there is something about resistance that happens that's extremely natural. It's a part of us. And it's not a defect. It's actually something that is an asset to us as humans. And that's why it happens. That's why it exists. And I think that is something that a lot of people never don't understand. And even in the change management practice, a lot of folks are very good at the methodologies, but don't understand why the methodologies work. And I think that's a key gap. So it started in the neuroscience study that I was doing, and went into speaking and kind of became work before it became a book. And as I continued to speak on this type of mindset and way of thinking about resistance as a part of biology rather than a threat to your, change or to your program, whatever that might be, it kind of just kept evolving and kept becoming more. So it built then into, I started doing leadership development with, C-suite executives. And then I started doing, some on-sites with, different executive teams. And then pretty soon after all these talks, people would say, well, do you have a book that I can buy? I would love to dive in more than the 45, 50 minutes that you were on stage. And that kind of launched into this, maybe it should be a book. And then I started going back to all the things I'd written down over the years. And I was like, what would a book look like? Obviously, I know what I talk about, but that's a 45-minute talk. That's not enough for a book. And so I went back to, research papers that I had kept and had read that I was like, this is really interesting about X, or those stories that I talked about that I'd written down from customers and clients that I'd worked with. And it became a book. It took the last 3 years of my kind of life, which seems crazy to say now because it felt like a snap of the fingers went by. But I started the book a few months before my son was born. My son's now 3.5. So it's been it's kind of grown up with my child, which has been kind of cool, actually.
Yeah. Was there a particular moment or area of your work or time phase of your work, whatever it may be, where that idea of resistance came through? Like when it kind of clicked that was something that you saw it. You may have been working in this field doing your work, but there's just moments when certain themes start popping out at you and you start seeing them. Was there a certain area of your work or time period of your work where you began to see that or really saw it?
When, it was when I was in my kind of consulting career, prior to the Neurological Nomad, where I would hear people talk about the resistors. It started to become a term that we used. And I want to say this is kind of around the 2015 timeframe, but we started using this term resistors. We started labeling people as resistors.
Yep.
And that never sat well with me because anytime I would go and examine resistance, I'm like, this person has a very valid reason as to why they're not on board.
Yeah.
And it's actually not, a lot of times it wasn't difficult. It was, I talk about these 6 barriers in the book, but a lot of times it came down to, they just hadn't had a chance to even do anything with it. So how do you adopt something you've never actually done? Or they didn't have information that they needed and they had questions, or, it represented a big loss. Like the person I talked about who had the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Like those were the things that would come out. And I'm like, this isn't a personality flaw. This is just a person who cares deeply about the work that they do. And we're telling them they can't do that work anymore, or they have to do it differently. And it comes out and they have basic needs around that. And that was really kind of the moment where I think my thinking diverged and started to really go into this, I'm going to examine it. I'm not going to just chalk them up to resistors, because quite frankly, there was a moment in time where we would basically chop off 10% and assume that they would just never get on board.
Yeah.
What? That seems so crazy to me, but it really was. We used to talk about that as part of the methodology. As there's probably 10% or so that'll never get on board. They're your resistors. It's like,
Boom.
okay, so we don't even try, you know? And that never sat well with me. And that was kind
Yeah.
of the first moment of like, this is not right. I don't agree with that.
Yeah, it's wild to think just how often I've met people in that state of mind that were resisting something. And it was just basically a conversation or consideration or acknowledgement. You're arguing or butting heads at the 10,000 foot level without really considering where they're coming from. I pulled in a lot of like my mediation background, thinking about what somebody wants, what they're fighting for versus what they really need. And very rarely are those people, there's no conversations had. There's no understanding that you're trying to meet or trying to get to. So I think it's powerful when you can just ask somebody, where's that coming from? Instead of just kind of going with the expected butting of heads. What are we really talking about? What does each of us really need? So Travis, how do you set the book up? What's an overview you can provide? What's that journey you take the reader down to kind of understand this world? And then I think you said there were six, I forgot the word you used, areas or lessons or
Barriers.
barriers. How did you lay out the book so you could lay out your message in the best form and get that across to the reader in the best shape? What does that look like?
Yeah. So, it went through many iterations of laying out, but what we landed on was my goals were and objectives for the book were I want this to be something that is both easy to read, has true like tactical takeaways. I call them the Monday moves. In my mind, that's not necessarily how they're referred in the book, but like Monday moves. Like if I read this, I could do something on Monday morning about that. I wanted it also to become referenceable. So those were kind of my three like big outcomes because I've read 100 books that are highly theoretical, don't have any tactical like takeaways. And at the end of it, you don't know where you could actually go back to be like, oh, I read that thing that I actually
Yeah.
would like to anchor in, and I don't know where that was in the book. So those were kind of the three outcomes that I was hoping for. So the way that we set it up was basically first setting up the problem, which is that resistance is not a character flaw. It is not a people problem. It's usually a protective response or a response to a need that someone has. And separating this idea of ego from a leadership perspective from what's actually happening when change happens. And I think that's a really important reset as we start the book because a lot of leaders assume that resistance is a direct attack on them as a leader. And so it is not. Spoiler alert, it's in the first chapter. It is not.
Yeah.
But then we go through the 6 neurological barriers, and each of those barriers is paired with a practical leadership chapter on how to respond to it, how to help overcome it, and the ways that you can also kind of predict it. And so it has a lot of different in those chapters where we go through the ways of overcoming. Each of them has a lot of different ways of doing it. Not all of them are necessary in every instance, but really to give a breadth for a leader to be like, well, I've tried this and, well, maybe I'll try that next thing. So all of them have at least 5 things that you can do as you're going through and leading change and transformation. And then we wrap it up with kind of how they play together as a holistic. And the reality is that the beautiful thing about neuroscience is that we all have a brain. Whether I'm trying to predict what's going to happen with other people, I can also predict what might happen with myself as I go through a change or as I'm looking at a change that's coming for me. And I now, at the end of the book, have language that I can ask for the things that I need as well. So it kind of brings it full circle. Is like how to lead it and then also how to turn it back on yourself and say, this is how I figure out what I need in these moments as well.
Without giving away the store, can you provide some of those barriers, some examples?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So, and I'll just give them to you. It's not a secret. They're in the book. I mean, so the 6 barriers. So we've got our basal ganglia that loves the routine. And leaders need to rebuild habits through repetition. It's our prefrontal cortex. It handles our learning. It gets overloaded very easily. Leaders need to create better pacing and space for learning. Exclusion activates areas of the brain associated with pain. So we create ownership and meaningful inclusion through changes as leaders. Ambiguity causes people to fill in missing information and kind of anchor in what they've learned over their past, years of life, and usually negative because they're looking at it from that lens of protection.
Yeah.
So leaders have to build trust through communicating and transparency and frequency of opportunity to ask questions and engage with it. Anxiety will activate our threat responses. So leaders have to visibly model those behaviors to build that confidence and show that it's okay to move in this new direction. And then finally, all change involves loss. So leaders need to respond with empathy and connection through every change, and that includes good or bad. And then, there's no acronym, there's no big methodology or framework. It's really that simple. It's those 6 barriers and anchoring in those as you're leading through changes.
I love that. I love that because it forces people to think about their own needs. So even if you're not a leader who's worried about this, you can be somebody that's coming up through a company reading this to know what you have to look out for in developing your own leadership. I'm of the mindset that you don't have to wait. Like you said, you don't need a title. You don't have to wait to have a title to get to that point where you're reading about leadership. I don't think you need to wait to get a title of any kind to read your book, just because these are things that are going to impact everybody. So if you can have that understanding as you're coming up, it lessens the headaches, it lessens the obstacles later. Doesn't make it easy, completely easy, but it provides tools to get people thinking even from the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. People ask if I'm really good at change because I work in it every day. And I'm like, no, I'm just as bad at change as everyone else. But what I do know, what makes it different for me is that when I have a reaction to change that's negative, my second question is why?
Yeah.
And I know that I can look through these kind of natural barriers and say, you know what? I bet it's because X. And I can go explore that or find, what I need to support that.
Yeah, just because people may teach, present, coach on anything doesn't mean that they have it 100% tied up beautifully in a perfect package. I feel like we're all learning regardless of what field we're in. I think those of us that are coaches of any kind, it's just that we're that curious about that field or area. But we're still learning as we're going. We're still works in progress. We're all of that.
Yeah.
Travis, for you, no rush. I know you put a lot of time into this book and you're out there promoting it as much as you can, but in general, no rush. In the future, is there any kind of area of writing that you want to go into? Is there anything that you want to focus on as you go forward?
So I early on in the writing process, as I was kind of thinking about what's the book going to be. I couldn't decide what angle to take with it, who to write to. Was it the leader? Was it the recipient? Was it the person making the decisions on the strategy? And so for me, this book, obviously it's applicable to all, but I think if I were to write again and do more writing in that space, it would be writing directly to the person receiving change. And how they can use this to help themselves articulate what they need. Because I think that's the hardest part. In leaders have the biggest impact on the number of people that they can help make life better for, because just scale, right?
Yeah.
But the recipients knowing how to ask for what they need when a leader maybe isn't doing it, that is also extremely powerful. And so I think that would be the next thing for me. And it's something I speak on a lot. I speak on all 3 of those all the time. But I think in a book form, I think that would be really helpful for recipients.
Absolutely. There's such a power in advocating for yourself. And I think most people don't do it because they don't believe that they have a right to. They don't think they have the space to. And obviously, every workplace is different. But they'll just shut themselves down completely because they figure, I'm the subordinate, right, on the org chart, so I don't have the right to meet my leader halfway or ask for anything that's productive. Like, that they don't have the right to ask for anything. So I think such a manual or reference book or anything that you might be able to craft would help people a lot. Travis, for you, I'm curious in writing this, not so much the writing process, the editing process, the technical part of putting the book together, but how has your work and going back and writing the book, how have you evolved? What's changed in you? How might you see things differently just from obviously putting your life's work into this book, crafting it? Do you look at it differently? Are there any other thoughts that have come up in your process of writing it? How have you evolved yourself? How have you changed?
The one is around the content. The book, because I wanted to make sure that it was, and I'm not a neuroscientist. I have a background with neuroscience. I am not a neuroscientist, and so for me, I wanted to make sure that it was heavily researched. And so that created a need for me to go and heavily research it and make sure, hey, this is a field that is ever evolving. The things I learned 10 years ago might not be what people believe anymore, and kind of stress testing it in that way. And so that helped me get fresher perspectives on kind of the research that's happening as well in this space. But, I think what it's done as well as seeing the reaction and hearing people talk about what it's done for them, or how it's changed a perspective, or how much their organization needs this kind of way of thinking, made it more important for me to continue in that writing, in creating, those assets for people in their day-to-day. And so, that's kind of for me what's evolved from it. And then just obviously meeting people that have experienced this and have stories. I love hearing their stories. And whether they're good or bad, like a lot of people share the bad, but a lot of people also share the great leaders that they've had that have embodied parts of this naturally. And when I talk to leadership groups, I usually say, you're not going to leave here with anything that you haven't learned probably through your own process, but I'm going to give you the reason why it works, that you've learned through kind of trial and error. I'm going to give you the cheat code as to why all of it actually works, which will help tie it together.
What book has inspired you? Obviously, we're covering your book in this episode, but what book stands out to you? What's that one book that kind of set the tone for who you may be, your work, your leadership? What stands out?
Can I give you two answers? Is that acceptable?
I wasn't going to say not as many as you want, but yeah, you can give me a couple.
I'll give you two. I'll give you the what inspired me as a practitioner, and then I'll give you the one that's really deeply inspirational to me, and I think that one will surprise you. So, for me, the book that I think really drove me to think more directly about writing a book, and the importance of the book that I had in me, was Atlas of the Heart by Brené Brown. And that is not typically a book that people reference from Brené Brown. And I wish it was, because the book is all about the importance of language and precision of language and how we define emotion. It's little things that we say that create realities that don't actually exist. And one of the ones that I love, and she digs into this. First off, I'm a huge Brené Brown fan, so anything Brené Brown, I will read, and I will absolutely tear through it. But the one that really struck me was when she talked a lot about the difference between jealousy and being envious. That they're two very different emotions. Jealousy is that you don't want someone to have it and you want it for yourself. Envious is you're glad they have it, but you also wish you did too. And we say all the time, oh, I'm so jealous of your trip. No, you're not. You're not jealous of the trip. You're envious of their trip. That's a very different emotion. And that precision of what it means, and the way that it's beautifully written, and the way that she is able to take that and show how that actually coats the experience, the mindset, the way that we interpret it without even recognizing or realizing that the language has done that is really impactful. And that was really impactful. A beautiful book. So that's kind of my like practitioner side. The book that actually for me has really had an impact on me is a book called The Rabbit Listened. I actually talked about this on another podcast a while back, but The Rabbit Listened is a children's book. I bought it for my son. My husband and I found it and we bought it for him. And then I read it. I was like, oh, well, I don't even need to write my book anymore because this book pretty much did it in about 7 pages. But it's about this little boy who builds this amazing like castle out of blocks, and then it falls down. And he's really having a lot of emotion around it. And all these animals come and try to like influence how he should react to that. Meaning, you should be mad, says the bear, or you should go knock down someone else's, says the snake, or whatever. And he really doesn't want any of that and doesn't need any of that. And then the rabbit shows up and just sits next to him and listens to him talk about how that experience impacted him and what he needs and what he wants, and how he works through that process of grief and of like acknowledgement, and then to the point where he's ready to build again and build a new castle. I'm like, okay, is this a children's book or is this a book for executives? Like, honestly, it is a beautiful book, and I love that book. And it makes me sad every time my son doesn't ask for that book when we haven't read it in a little while. Like, I'll try to like hint it, be like, should we read The Rabbit Listen?
And no,
I don't want that one. But yes,
I'm always curious with children's authors. Like, I just want to go up to them and be like, who did you really write this book for? Like, seriously, tell me. You can tell me. I won't tell anybody else. I mean, somebody came on this show years ago and did this book, The Places You'll Go. Oh, The Places You'll Go.
Oh, yeah.
I had never read it, and I bought a copy just because I'm like, all right, it's a children's book. I believe him. It's a children's book. I'm going to read it before our conversation, and that one was incredible too. So, I mean, there's just subtle lessons and all. And like you said, it doesn't take much. Just the visuals of the different animals coming up to the character, and then the rabbit sitting. It's just all these lessons that we work in. They're applicable from preschool all the way to seasoned executives. The language changes, the vernacular changes, the environments, obviously, everything that goes along with it. But the lessons are just so simple.
They are so simple. And I agree with you on the children's authors. Like, I strongly and firmly believe that every children's book is rooted in some adult that did something that this person wished they would have done differently. And they're writing it for a child, hoping that child will learn to do it differently.
Beautifully said, my friend. Travis, in wrapping up, what are you up to these days that you want to share? Maybe something I haven't asked about that you want to put out there? Anything at all? The floor is yours, my friend.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, we didn't really even talk much about AI in this conversation, which is both refreshing and surprising because I feel like all we do is talk about AI in this world. So next for me, obviously still supporting the book and continuing to do that work through the book. But, I have part of the research and part of the timing was really beautiful around, I had started to apply this into AI transformation and what neurology tells us about what we're going to need to go through this transformative era, which is AI, and the realities and the relationships that we have with a change like this, and how companies are approaching it as if it's the same change as when they put in a new system, and the differences there. So I've done a lot of work in that space. I just launched a new keynote called Why Your AI Transformation is Neurologically Destined to Fail and What to Do About It. And that I think is so important because it truly is a behavioral mindset shift, not simply a new tool to leverage.
I mean, if there's anything you want to share, like your thoughts on that, anything you want to share that you think is worthwhile, please do. I apologize. It didn't come up. You're right, though. It is kind of refreshing. We didn't talk about AI.
Was wonderful. Not a slam at the conversation at all.
Not at all.
It was wonderful to not talk about it for an hour.
But
here we are, and I brought it in.
Say more. That's fine. That's fine. Go ahead.
Here I am, bringing it up. But so the reality of it is that or I shouldn't say we, a lot of companies are approaching it as a tool. And the difference between tools and mindset shifts is that a tool is something that someone can use that is helpful, right? We're putting AI into that bucket, but then we're asking them to do something very different in how they think. A tool, by its nature, should not really change the way you think. It should be able to help you do what you do. AI is not a tool. AI is a mindset shift and different way of working. And so we have to approach it in that way. And a lot of companies right now are doing what you would do with a tool, which is putting it out there and saying, here you are, here's a tool that makes it easier, almost like it's, the screen recording tool that you have on your computer or whatever that might be. But when you're doing that, people are sitting with this tension of, okay, everything I read is that AI is causing layoffs to happen and taking jobs. Everything I'm seeing is that if you're not using AI, you're falling behind. I'm also basically being handed this and having to do it all myself, and having to figure out what it means. They're saying very vague things like, be more productive, be more effective, be more efficient. What does that actually mean? What does it mean for me? So we're not approaching it as a mindset shift, or many aren't. And I think we need to. And a lot of that is rooted in our neuroscience. So by creating it and making it, as one example, making it an individual transformation, you're creating exclusion. You're creating an exclusive experience for a person. So now, you're telling me I have to figure out how to be efficient and effective, and I have to figure out what that means and how to do that all on my own. I don't feel like I'm part of a group in this moment. I feel like it's sink or swim, but it's all on me.
Yeah.
That neurologically does not lend to fast adoption, fast usage, or truly what your objectives are with AI. So anyway, I get into a lot of that, but surprise, surprise, it's anchored in the same 6 barriers that happen as we go through changes. And there's a lot in there that we're disregarding in this moment.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, as you were just giving the example of what, making it like an individual thing and they're kind of like on their own and you're not making the connection, you're not providing an understanding, you're not, as you were going through that example, I could see the connection to each one of those barriers that you outlined. So that's great that it's an extension of those same lessons that we can learn from your current book. So, I'm, like you said, not glad that we didn't get into it, but I appreciate you sharing that here. Is there anything else that you have coming up in terms of that keynote? Anything else you want to, I'll share your website and all the information about this book, everything that you sent me, but is there anything else you want to share?
No, just feel free to connect with me. For your listeners, I love connecting with people. As I mentioned, it's something that I'm passionate about. And if you have experiences, questions, thoughts, I am really, really excited to hear them. So, please,
Travis, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
And again, Travis shared his book, Rethink Resistance, Embracing Neuroscience to Lead Transformational Change. If there's anything I might have missed, please let me know. There's so much to cover, so little time, even though I kept Travis here for almost an hour and 20 minutes. I'll reach out to him, see what kind of additional insights, guidance, wisdom, all of it I can get back. I've connected with him on LinkedIn, so I've already been following his work, seeing what he's been up to. Again, he's always got those tidbits that he's throwing out there. Especially, I think it's important for people to understand their neuroscience. And I think people are only getting into the neuroscience understanding, and then you throw AI on top of that. So I think it's even more important to follow Travis's work. But in any case, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.